Most people don't realize the moment their mind starts to break. It doesn't happen during some massive failure or tragic collapse. It happens on a random Tuesday when you tell yourself, "What's the point?" It's the quiet surrender to doubt, the subtle acceptance of mediocrity, and once that seed is planted, it grows silently, until one day you don't recognize yourself. You're still functioning, still showing up, but your spirit, your will, is nowhere to be found. The Stoics warned us, it's not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to truly live. And to truly live, you need a mind that doesn't fold under pressure. You need an attitude that doesn't depend on the weather of your life to feel steady inside. You need inner control, not because the world is fair, but because it rarely is. And if you can master that, if you can stand when everything in you wants to sit, you'll unlock a kind of power no one can take from you. This is not about motivation. It's about mental strength, quiet, resilient, immovable. That's what we're building here, together. If that's a path you're ready to walk, consider subscribing, not just to follow this channel, but to commit to a way of thinking that makes you unshakable. There's a strange heaviness some people carry every single day, but it's not from what they think. It's not the job, the debt, or the stress. It's the quiet weight of all the moments they gave up on themselves without even realizing it. The decision they postponed because it felt uncomfortable. The promise they made to themselves and silently broke. The boundaries they allowed others to cross without resistance. And over time, all of it builds into something invisible but suffocating, like an anchor tied to the mind. You don't always feel the pull, but you feel its consequences. Fatigue without action, emptiness after achievement, and a quiet dread that follows you even in peace. It's subtle, almost gentle. But that's what makes it dangerous. No one wakes up one day completely defeated. It happens gradually, not through collapse, but through quiet surrender. And the saddest part is that most people have no idea it's even happening. They keep moving forward, dragging that weight through their days, wondering why joy feels distant and focus feels impossible. The anchor never announces itself. It hides in self-betrayal that felt too small to matter. One skipped workout, one avoided conversation, one moment of silence when you should have stood up for yourself. That's how it starts. Not with a bang, but with permission. Permission to settle. Permission to lie to yourself just a little. The Stoics warned us that habits, once formed, shape our character more than our thoughts. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But what happens when you don't exercise that power? When you let outside events slowly write your inner script? You stop choosing your life, and you begin reacting to it. The worst part about this internal erosion is that it's quiet, and anything quiet is easy to rationalize. You tell yourself you're just tired, that it's just a phase, that everyone feels this way sometimes. And maybe they do, but not everyone stays there, because some people eventually wake up. They realize they've been carrying something they never needed to carry, not their past, not their guilt, but their refusal to confront it. That refusal is the real weight, and it becomes so familiar that people stop questioning it. They call it their personality or their limits, when in truth, it's just layers of unaddressed moments stacked one on top of the other. There's a difference between rest and resignation. Rest is what you do when you've worked hard. Resignation is what happens when you've lost belief in your ability to change. And it doesn't come from failure, it comes from avoidance, from putting off the hard truths in favor of temporary comforts. But no comfort is truly comfortable if it costs you clarity. And when your mind is clouded, your life starts to drift. You don't even know where you're going anymore. You're just moving for the sake of movement, hoping something will feel right again. But nothing does, because the thing that needs fixing isn't outside, it's you. Not in the sense that something is wrong with you, but in the sense that something powerful inside you has been neglected. You've handed your attitude over to convenience, to emotion, to habit, and now it's time to take it back. Cutting that invisible anchor doesn't start with a grand gesture. It starts with a quiet decision. A decision to stop betraying yourself in small ways, to stop telling yourself it doesn't matter, because it does. Every time you let your standards drop to avoid discomfort, you're voting against your future. Every time you silence your instinct to speak truth or make a change, you're feeding that anchor, and it grows, until one day you're dragging a version of yourself you don't even recognize. You don't need to fix everything today, but you do need to stop feeding what's breaking you. That means honesty, ruthless honesty, not just with others, but with yourself. Where are you making excuses? Where are you pretending not to care? Where have you convinced yourself that it's too late? These aren't just questions, they are mirrors, and it takes courage to look into them. But if you do, you might just see that the person you want to become isn't far off. They're just waiting for you to stop dragging the version that quit. Most people never notice when the giving up begins because it doesn't feel like a crisis. It feels like a choice, a small one. But those small choices shape the mind. They create a version of you that tolerates less from yourself. And the more you tolerate, the more you forget what it's like to be powerful. Because power doesn't come from loud achievements. It comes from quiet consistency, from choosing your values even when no one is watching, from showing up when the feeling is gone, from choosing growth over ease, again and again. The anchor that holds most people back is never the world. It's the story they've accepted about themselves, a story written not in trauma or tragedy, but in small silences, silent guilt, silent regret, silent settling. But silence is not strength, not when it replaces action. The mind is a tool, but left unattended it becomes a trap. And if you don't take control of it, it will take control of you. It will guide you to comfortable decisions, safe choices, shallow thinking, and slowly you'll trade depth for distraction. That's the cost of a weak mental attitude. Not failure, but the slow, painful erosion of meaning. You wake up one day and realize nothing feels real anymore. You go through motions, smile when needed, perform when required, but the light's gone out. That's what happens when you carry the anchor long enough. It doesn't just slow you down, it dulls you. And the scariest part, you get used to it. You get used to living with less than you deserve. Less peace, less clarity, less courage, until the memory of your potential becomes a stranger. But it's never too late to remember who you were before you started dragging that weight. It's never too late to draw a line and say, no more. Because the mind can be trained, the story can be rewritten, the anchor can be cut. But only if you're willing to stop pretending it isn't there. Only if you're willing to stand still, look inward and say, this ends with me. That moment is the first real sign of power. Not when you appear strong, but when you decide to become strong again. Most people are fighting the wrong battles. They spend their energy trying to fix their job, their partner, their bank account, their past. But the true battlefield is not out there. It's not in the chaos around them. It's in the chaos within. And until you recognize that, you'll keep treating symptoms while the sickness grows. You weren't broken by the rejection. You were broken by what you told yourself it meant. It wasn't the loss that crushed you. It was the story that followed. I'm not enough. This always happens to me. Nothing ever works. The world didn't destroy you. Your interpretation did. And that's the enemy that most people never see. the one whispering in their own voice, inside their own mind, pretending to be truth when it's just fear in disguise. The Stoics warned us about this long ago. They knew the real threat was not the pain we face, but the lens through which we see that pain. Epictetus said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them." It's your view, your filter, that determines whether a moment becomes your downfall or your transformation. But most people don't know they're looking through a filter. They think their perception is the truth. And that's where they get trapped. Because you can't change what you won't question. You can't fix the lens if you think it's a window. That's why some people collapse under pressure while others rise from it. It's not about strength. It's about how they choose to see. The one who falls sees obstacles as personal attacks. The one who rises sees them as invitations to grow. And the difference is not luck or fate or even talent. It's attitude. That internal posture you take when things don't go your way. That tiny moment when something hurts and you decide, consciously or not, what that hurt will mean. Most people don't choose in that moment. They react, and their reaction becomes a habit. Over time, they stop seeing the world for what it is and start seeing it only through their past pain. That's when life starts to feel like a repeating loop. The same patterns, the same fears, the same results. Not because the world is against you, but because you've become loyal to the version of yourself that was shaped by hurt. You've internalized your wounds as identity, and that's what the enemy within does. It convinces you to carry the voice of your pain into every room you enter. So even when things are good, even when people love you, even when you have a chance to grow, you sabotage it. Not because you want to suffer, but because suffering has become familiar. And in a strange way, familiarity feels safer than change. But the truth is, the enemy within is not unbeatable. In fact, it weakens the moment you recognize it for what it is. A set of automatic interpretations you've been rehearsing for years. And if it was learned, it can be unlearned. If it was built, it can be dismantled. But not by blaming the world. That's what keeps people stuck. They think, once my situation changes, I'll feel better. But it doesn't work that way. You don't wait for peace, you create it. Not by controlling the storm, but by calming the voice inside that keeps screaming about it. Real control doesn't come from bending life to your will. It comes from mastering your lens, how you see, how you think, how you respond. Because if your inner world is in disarray, no amount of success will bring you peace. You'll still find a way to feel lost. You'll still doubt yourself in the quiet moments. You'll still carry that restlessness, that edge, that feeling that something is off, even when everything looks fine on the outside. That's the trap of chasing change without fixing perception. You reach your goals, but your mind stays the same. And eventually, it pulls you back to where you started. You don't need the world to be easier. You need your mind to be stronger. And strength doesn't come from avoidance. It comes from confrontation. Facing the stories you've been telling yourself. Interrupting them. Challenging them. Replacing them. Not just once, but over and over, until your mind knows a new way. Until your first instinct isn't self-blame or panic or shutdown, but calm, clarity, and resolve. That's when you know the enemy within is no longer in charge, when your reactions no longer rule your reality. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And maybe that's why most people never look inside, because what they find there isn't just darkness, it's potential. And potential demands responsibility. It demands you stop making excuses. It demands you rise above the comfort of victimhood and claim authorship over your perception. That's the hard part. It's easier to believe the world is the problem. But once you see the pattern, once you realize it's your interpretation shaping your experience, you can never unsee it. You either grow or you pretend. There's no middle. And growth starts with awareness, not just knowing your thoughts, but watching them, listening to the way you speak to yourself when no one else can hear. Do you speak power or pity? Do you rise to the challenge or replay your doubts? That voice inside you, it's not fixed, it's not fate, it's a habit. And like any habit, it can be rewired, slowly, intentionally, with patience. Every time you choose a new interpretation, every time you shift your perspective from why me to what now, you are dismantling the enemy within. You are not your failures. You are not your past reactions. You are not the voice in your head that doubts everything good. You are the one who chooses whether to keep listening. That's your power. That's where freedom lives, not in what happens to you, but in how you frame it. That's the art of building an unbreakable mind, refusing to let circumstances define your identity, refusing to let pain become your language, and refusing to let the enemy within be louder than the purpose pulling you forward. Most people never realize how much control they have over their reality. Not the external world, that will always move the way it moves, but their inner world, the place where meaning is made, that's where the real power lies. Something difficult happens, and two people walk away from it with entirely different stories. One sees loss, the other sees preparation. One feels punished, the other feels shaped. And the only difference between them isn't luck, intelligence, or circumstance, it's interpretation. That silent, invisible lens that turns experience into either fuel or poison. And most of the time, that lens gets built without our awareness. It's shaped by fear, by old wounds, by things we were told when we were too young to question them. But at some point, if you want to live with strength, you have to take that lens into your own hands. You have to stop reacting and start choosing what things mean. It's a simple truth, but most people never consider it. Nothing in life has meaning until you give it meaning. A delay is not inherently frustrating. A failure is not inherently humiliating. A rejection is not inherently a reflection of your worth. They only become those things when you assign them those labels. But if that's true, if you're the one assigning meaning, then it means you have a say in how any experience shapes you. That's not wishful thinking, that's freedom. And it's not about pretending everything is good. It's about looking deeper and asking yourself what you want to carry forward from it. Do you want this moment to define you by your pain or your growth? Most of what we call suffering doesn't come from the event itself. It comes from the meaning we attach to it. That's why two people can go through the same setback. One crumbles and the other transforms. The event didn't choose their path. Their interpretation did, and that's the part no one teaches you growing up. You're told to chase results, to avoid failure, to seek approval, but no one tells you that the most important thing isn't what happens. It's what you tell yourself afterward. That internal dialogue becomes your reality, and if you don't master it, it masters you. Imagine what would change if your first instinct in hardship wasn't to complain or collapse, but to pause and ask, what is this moment giving me? That one question flips the entire structure of your thinking. It invites patience where there used to be panic. It creates curiosity where there was blame, and it teaches your mind to search for meaning instead of pain. That's not denial, that's discipline. Because it's easy to feel good when things go your way. It's a completely different skill to stay grounded when they don't. And that skill is built in how you interpret. That doesn't mean you have to be happy about everything. It means you stop letting your first reaction run your life. Emotional maturity begins the moment you realize that your feelings are real, but they aren't always right. A moment of anger doesn't require a reaction. A moment of fear doesn't mean you're in danger. Feelings are messengers, not masters, and interpretation is how you decode them. When you pause, breathe, and ask yourself what else this could mean, you begin to see that every situation is layered. There's the surface-level discomfort, and then there's the lesson underneath, if you're willing to find it. The pressure is never the problem. The problem is when you assume pressure is punishment instead of preparation. That assumption, that instant meaning you assign to difficulty, shapes everything. If you believe life is against you, every challenge will confirm it. If you believe life is testing you, every challenge will refine you. It's not about lying to yourself. It's about choosing a mindset that builds strength instead of weakness. The mind is always assigning meaning. It doesn't matter if it's small or large, joyful or painful. Your brain is constantly weaving a narrative. And once that narrative is set, your actions follow. That's why people repeat the same habits, the same emotional spirals, the same self-sabotaging decisions. It's not that they love pain, it's that their story is stuck. Their lens has been unchallenged. But the moment you stop and say, "Is this the only way to see this?" you start loosening that grip. And with each layer you peel back, you gain more freedom. Not to change the event, but to rise above it. That's the hidden key most people never discover. The power of interpretation is the power of transformation. You don't need a new life, you need a new lens. Because the life you're living could already be the breakthrough you're hoping for if you just see it differently. Maybe that delay you hate is actually saving you from a worse outcome. Maybe that closed door is redirecting you toward a better one. But you'll never know if you're always labeling everything as loss. Training the mind to interpret wisely is a daily practice. It doesn't happen by accident. You have to pay attention to your thoughts, especially the quiet ones, the ones you say to yourself when you're alone. If they're filled with blame, guilt, fear, or self-pity, then your lens is dirty. And no matter how good life gets, you'll still feel stuck. But clean the lens, challenge the thoughts, and suddenly the same situation looks different. Not easier, but clearer. And clarity is more powerful than comfort. This doesn't mean you ignore reality. It means you become more responsible for your reaction to it. You stop outsourcing your peace to perfect conditions. You stop believing that external success will fix internal chaos. Because it never will. Peace doesn't come from what happens. It comes from what you decide it means. And if you can train your mind to search for value in adversity, you'll become someone that difficulty can't destroy. Interpretation is the tool that builds resilience. Every time you catch yourself spiraling into negativity, every time you choose to reframe instead of react, you're proving to your mind that it works for you, not the other way around. You're building a mental muscle that can lift the weight of uncertainty, of setbacks, of change. And over time, that mindset becomes your default. You become someone who doesn't flinch when things go wrong, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you've learned how to make pain useful. It's not about controlling every thought. It's about choosing the ones you entertain. And once you take responsibility for your interpretation, you begin to take responsibility for your entire life. That's when everything changes. Not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily. You stop being a victim of what happened. You start becoming a student of it. And from there, no experience is wasted. Every loss becomes a lesson. Every delay becomes development. Every test becomes training. And slowly, you become the kind of person who can't be shaken by ordinary storms, because your lens, your attitude, your interpretation has been sharpened by the extraordinary. There's a common misunderstanding when people talk about mental strength. They imagine it's about being cold, unfeeling, detached, like becoming a stone that nothing can touch. But that's not strength, that's suppression. And suppression isn't power, it's a disguise for fear. Because the truth is, strength isn't about avoiding emotion. It's about no longer being ruled by it. To build an unbreakable mind, you don't kill your feelings. You reclaim authority over them. You acknowledge them, you feel them, but you don't follow them. They speak, but you decide what gets heard. Most people don't realize how much they're being led by emotions until they've already made a decision they regret. They say things in anger, withdraw in sadness, procrastinate under fear, and when the wave passes, they're left wondering why they feel lost. It's not the emotion that broke them, it's the obedience. They thought feeling something meant they had to act on it. But feeling is just information. It's a signal, not a sentence. And the ability to recognize that is where emotional neutrality begins. Neutrality is not indifference, it's stability. It's what happens when you stop reacting to every rise and fall like it's the end of the world. When you stop allowing your day to be hijacked by whatever mood happens to arrive in the morning. An unbreakable mind doesn't fight the weather of emotion. It simply refuses to let it change the course. Like a mountain, present, aware, but unmoved. That's the posture of strength, not because it avoids storms, but because it stands through them without losing its shape. Emotional neutrality is the result of choosing response over reaction. It means noticing what you feel without making it your identity, saying to yourself, yes, I'm angry, yes, I'm hurt, but I choose not to let this speak for me. That's not weakness, it's restraint. And restraint is one of the most underrated forms of power, because anyone can explode, anyone can crumble, but to remain centered when everything in you wants to lash out or shut down, that's rare, that's mastery. You don't have to fight your emotions, you only have to stop letting them drive. Picture your emotions like passengers in a car. They can ride with you, but they don't touch the wheel. They don't decide the direction. You acknowledge them, maybe even thank them for showing up, but then you put your hands back on the steering wheel. That's what it means to lead yourself, to feel deeply, but to think clearly. The Stoics knew this. They didn't aim to eliminate feeling. They aimed to elevate reason, to protect their inner calm no matter the outer chaos. Life will not adjust to your emotions, but you can train your emotions to adjust to life. Not by pretending they don't exist, but by refusing to be dragged by them. You learn to say, this is difficult, but it's not destructive. This is painful, but it doesn't define me. That clarity in the face of emotional noise is how resilience is formed. The more often you practice this, the more natural it becomes. At first, it feels like a battle, like you're holding back a flood with your bare hands. But over time, your nervous system adapts. You begin to recognize the waves before they crash. You catch the thoughts before they spiral. And you no longer fear your own reactions because you've built the space between what you feel and what you do. That space is everything. It's where all power lives. The ability to pause, to observe, to choose. Without that space, you are a slave to every sensation. With it, you are free. The mistake most people make is thinking that emotional control is coldness. But if anything, it allows you to love better, connect deeper, and lead stronger, because you're not clouded. You're not bringing past wounds into present moments. You're not bleeding onto people who didn't cut you. Neutrality gives you the clarity to show up as your full self, not your fearful self. And that changes everything. Your relationships, your decisions, your peace. It's easy to be calm when nothing is testing you. But the real test is staying centered when life isn't cooperating, when the deal falls through, when the person disappoints you, when the plan collapses. That's when neutrality is proven, not in theory, but in practice. You get to decide, will I be pulled by emotion or anchored by principle? The latter is what makes you solid. And the more you choose it, the more your default response becomes calm, even when chaos is loud. There will always be moments that shake you: loss, betrayal, unexpected turns. You're not made of steel, you're human. And humanity is not weakness, it's the condition through which strength is built. You don't rise by ignoring your humanity, you rise by organizing it. You take the fear and point it toward action. You take the grief and let it deepen your empathy. You take the anger and channel it into discipline. That's what neutrality gives you, not a lack of feeling, but the ability to aim your feelings where they do the most good. Carl Jung once said, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness." The word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness. That balance is what neutrality respects. You're not chasing only light. You're accepting the full spectrum while choosing not to be thrown off course by any single part of it. That's why you don't crumble when the sadness comes. You don't explode when the anger hits. You let it pass through without poisoning your direction. Eventually, this becomes less about self-control and more about self-trust. You trust yourself to stay steady, to think before you speak, to breathe before you decide. And that trust becomes confidence, not loud, not arrogant, but quiet and unshakable. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself, because it already knows where it stands. So no, an unbreakable mind doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you feel everything, but you choose what you follow. You lead even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. That's what separates strength from noise, depth from impulse, power from performance. And the longer you walk that path, the less you react like a leaf in the wind, and the more you stand like a mountain, still grounded, unmoved, no matter what storms come. Most people live in a constant state of reaction. They wake up already on edge, bracing for the next crisis, the next inconvenience, the next disappointment. Their peace is entirely conditional, tied to how the day unfolds, how others behave, how closely reality matches their expectations. And when those expectations are shattered, as they often are, they spiral. But it's not because life is uniquely difficult. It's because their inner world is too fragile to withstand the weight of outer chaos. The truth is, you cannot control the world. It will shift, bend, collapse and rebuild in ways you never anticipated. But your mind, your perspective, your response, your attitude, that is the only territory you truly own. And most never realize how much power lives there, simply because they've never trained it. To live well, you don't need perfect conditions. You need a prepared mind. Not rigid, not hardened, but steady, like water that adapts, but never loses its depth. That kind of mind doesn't wish the world would be easier. It becomes stronger, more precise, less dependent on comfort, because comfort is a poor teacher. It teaches you to expect softness, to expect predictability. But the world doesn't reward those who expect. It rewards those who adapt. And to adapt, you need structure within. You need a foundation that doesn't crack every time the ground shifts beneath you. You don't need fewer problems. You need better skills. You need a mind that has been through enough inner work that chaos outside no longer feels like a threat, but a reminder. It's time to return to what you've built. Stability isn't about standing still. It's about standing firm. When your values are intact, when your vision is clear, when your self-respect doesn't depend on how others treat you, you move through the world differently. You don't chase validation. You don't beg for peace. You don't crumble when things get uncomfortable. You anchor yourself, not in a moment, not in a mood, but in the habits you've chosen, the beliefs you've refined, the standards you refuse to drop. That's what discipline creates. Not restriction, but clarity. It sharpens your responses. It shapes your posture. It keeps your mind sealed like a vault, untouched by every gust of noise that blows through the day. That doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you don't get swept. Because your center is strong, not because life gave it to you, but because you carved it from the parts of you that used to be weak. That carving is not comfortable. It takes awareness, commitment, and discomfort. But it's the discomfort that reveals where your work is, where you still panic, where you still seek control outside because you haven't claimed it inside. And that's the work most avoid. They would rather manage every possible outcome than learn how to manage themselves. But when you stop fearing the storm, you stop needing to control the sky. You walk into the chaos, not as a victim, but as someone who knows their power doesn't come from prediction, it comes from preparation. Inner stability comes from making your mind a place you can live in. Most people's minds are chaotic, not because they are broken, but because they are cluttered, filled with unchecked fears, borrowed beliefs, and unexamined thoughts that repeat like background noise. And when outer chaos hits, that noise becomes unbearable. But when you clean the internal space, when you declutter, simplify, clarify, you realize that peace isn't something you chase. It's something you uncover by removing what never belonged. That's why stillness isn't found in isolation. It's found in ownership. Owning what you allow to stay. Owning what you refuse to feed. Owning what you do when no one's watching. And ownership starts with the question, what am I building? A cracked glass or a sealed vault? A cracked glass may look fine when the world is calm, but the moment pressure hits, it leaks, it breaks, it can't contain anything. But a sealed vault, it holds, not because it's invincible, but because it was built intentionally, every layer reinforced, every weakness addressed, every corner secured. That's what discipline does. It's not just about routines. It's about building the capacity to hold your own thoughts, feelings, and decisions with strength. So when life throws you into discomfort, you don't ask for relief. You lean on the structure you've already built, and that structure must be tested. That's how you know it's real. You can read every book, quote every philosopher, build the perfect plan, but if you fall apart every time the day doesn't go your way, then the structure was never strong. It was theoretical, and life will expose that, not to hurt you, but to show you where the cracks still are. And if you're willing to see that not as failure, but as feedback, then you're already ahead of most. Because most people get angry when the world doesn't protect their illusions. They think peace means nothing goes wrong, but peace is when something goes wrong and you stay grounded anyway. Carl Jung once said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you." That is why inner stability matters. If you don't define your mind will be defined by noise, by pressure, by everyone else's expectations. And once that happens, you've lost control, not just of your emotions, but of your direction. You begin chasing things you don't want, accepting things you don't deserve, saying yes when you mean no, because you're no longer leading your life, you're managing reactions. But there is another way. You can slow down, observe yourself, build the kind of internal structure that doesn't require the world to behave. You can create rituals that center you, beliefs that guide you, and boundaries that protect your energy. You can make your peace non-negotiable, not because it always feels good, but because it's rooted in who you've decided to be. That's what unshakable looks like. Not perfect, not always calm, but anchored, disciplined, directed. And the more you choose this, the less you need from the outside. You stop relying on praise to feel worthy. You stop needing agreement to feel confident. You stop panicking when things don't go according to plan, because your strength isn't in the plan, it's in your preparation. You've already decided how to move through chaos, not with fear, but with clarity, not with control, but with composure. That is what makes the difference between someone who survives and someone who leads. One is at the mercy of the winds. The other is guided by their own compass. Not because they knew what was coming, but because they prepared their mind for whatever comes. And when that's your default, you don't just face life, you master it, one storm at a time. People talk about resilience like it's a personality trait, like some people are born with it and others aren't. But that's not true. Resilience isn't gifted, it's practiced. It's not a switch you flip in a crisis. It's a muscle you build in the quiet, ordinary moments of life when nobody's watching. It's forged in those uncomfortable decisions you make when comfort would be easier. When you get out of bed, even though everything inside you is begging to stay down. When you tell the truth, even though it might cost you something. When you keep your standards intact, even though the world keeps tempting you to drop them. That's resilience. And it doesn't feel heroic when you're building it. It feels small, repetitive, almost invisible. But over time, those quiet repetitions form something unshakable inside you. Most people want to be strong when it matters, but few are willing to do the work when it doesn't. They wait for the storm to hit before they start training their minds. But by then, it's too late. You don't learn to swim in the middle of the flood. You prepare before it arrives. Resilience works the same way. It's not a burst of bravery. It's a ritual of returning to your principles over and over, even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't feel like it. That's the moment where real strength begins, when your emotions beg you to quit, to hide, to retaliate, and instead you choose to stay the course. Choosing the hard thing isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as not saying the thing you know will hurt someone. Sometimes it's biting your tongue, walking away, or doing the work you promised yourself you'd do long after the excitement is gone. It's writing when you're uninspired. It's staying disciplined when you're unnoticed. It's sticking to your process when results are nowhere in sight. This isn't glamorous, but that's the point. Resilience is quiet. It's not a loud declaration, it's a steady presence, a silent agreement you make with yourself. I will not fold. Over time, this repetition forms your character, not because you never fall, but because you always get back up in the same direction. Resilience doesn't make you untouchable, it makes you returnable. You return to your vision, your values, your integrity, again and again. That's what builds momentum, not motivation, not intensity, but ritual. You decide what kind of person you want to be, and then you rehearse it, day in, day out, until it becomes your nature. Not perfect, but dependable. Not flashy, but real. This practice isn't easy because it asks you to act from principle rather than impulse, to choose patience over anger, discipline over convenience, honor over short-term gain. That kind of decision isn't rewarded immediately. Often no one sees it, no one claps for it, and that's where most give up, because they're still chasing recognition instead of identity. But the Stoics taught us that your character is your fate. And character is not built in emotion, it's built in repetition, in the pattern of your decisions. One day you'll face a moment that tests everything you believe in. You won't see it coming, there won't be time to prepare. And in that moment, you will act on whatever rituals you've been building all along. If you've trained yourself to react out of fear or frustration, that's what will show up. But if you've practiced stillness, clarity, and principle, then even in pressure, you'll hold your ground. That's why the practice matters. It's not about being ready for one big moment. It's about becoming someone who's always ready, because your foundation isn't built on emotion, but on deliberate choice. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. The same is true for resilience. It's not something you summon, it's something you live into. And the way you live into it is by creating systems that make your values automatic. You don't wait to feel strong, You structure your life in a way that makes strength more likely. You reduce the friction between your intention and your action. You eliminate distractions. You protect your time. You rehearse what matters. And slowly, you create a rhythm that supports you even when motivation vanishes. This isn't about never breaking down. It's about returning faster. Each time you fall, you return a little quicker, a little clearer, a little stronger. You learn to fail forward, to treat the setback not as proof of weakness, but as part of the ritual. Because failure doesn't disqualify you from the path, it deepens your commitment to it. It reminds you what's real, what matters, what's worth returning to. And that's where grit is born, not in avoiding the fall, but in choosing the rise. You may think it's too late to build this kind of strength, that you've already given up too many times. But resilience doesn't care where you've been. It cares what you do next. The next choice is always yours. The next hour, the next day, the next decision. That's where your power lives. Not in the past, but in the pattern you create now. And every pattern begins with one small, inconvenient, courageous step. That's the truth most overlook. They want transformation, but they ignore the tiny rituals that lead there. So if you want to become unbreakable, stop waiting to feel different. Start doing different. Start showing up when it's hard. Start honoring your word, even when no one is watching. Start living by a code that doesn't flex with your emotions. Let your actions become so consistent that even doubt grows tired of testing you. Let your discipline speak louder than your doubt. Let your small daily choices tell a bigger story about who you are becoming. The ritual of resilience is not grand. It's not heroic in the way movies portray it. It's in the ordinary moments, the unnoticed mornings, the quiet commitments, the decisions no one claps for. But that's where the power is. That's where the edge lives. And over time, those little acts of integrity compound into something extraordinary. Not because you're extraordinary, but because you built something most never take the time to build. A foundation that holds. Resilience isn't a feeling. It's not about feeling strong. It's about showing up even when you don't. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs permission to act from their highest self. Someone who lives the values they speak about. Someone who turns discomfort into ritual, pain into process, fear into fuel. Someone who doesn't rise because they feel ready, but because rising has become their way. There's a moment, usually subtle, when a feeling tries to claim your identity. You wake up tired and think, I must be lazy. You feel uncertain and say, I must be weak. You feel overlooked and believe, I must be worthless. But those aren't truths. They're interpretations of emotion, temporary states pretending to be permanent realities. And if you're not careful, you'll start shaping your entire life around those fleeting moments. You'll make long-term decisions based on short-term discomfort. You'll build your self-concept on feelings that were never meant to stay. But you are not your feelings. You are the space behind them. You are the awareness watching them rise and fall. You are the one choosing what to do with what shows up. The danger isn't in having emotions. It's in confusing them for identity. It's in letting a moment of sadness convince you that you are a sad person, or letting a wave of anxiety dictate that you must be broken. But feelings are just signals, raw data from your body, your environment, your thoughts. They arrive unannounced. They demand attention. And if you're not grounded, they can take over. But that takeover only happens when you forget who's in charge. When you forget that you can pause, step back, and say, this is just a feeling. It's not the whole truth. What people rarely understand is that emotions don't need to be fixed. They need to be felt, understood, and then released. You're not supposed to trap them, nor should you let them rule you. Let them speak, but don't let them write the story. Let them pass through, but don't let them rearrange your values while they're visiting. Because when you let feelings dictate who you are, you become inconsistent. One day you're confident, the next you collapse. One disagreement and your identity dissolves. That's not because you lack strength, it's because you've allowed emotion to become your ruler instead of your advisor. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." That includes what happens inside you. You are not what your anger tells you. You are not what your fear whispers. You are not what your insecurity suggests. You are the one deciding what to build with it. And if you don't claim that role, if you let your internal weather determine your external behavior, you'll never be stable. You'll constantly shapeshift depending on what shows up emotionally. You'll never feel grounded because your foundation isn't built on principle. It's built on moods. The Stoics referred to this as your ruling faculty, the part of you that can observe, decide, and act with intention, regardless of internal turbulence. It's not about suppressing what you feel. It's about separating your choices from those feelings. It's the quiet strength of watching a storm pass through your body without letting it steer your life. It's the practice of noticing a wave of doubt and saying, "I see you, but I've got something more important to follow." And yes, it is a practice. It's not something that happens automatically, especially if you've spent years reacting instead of responding, years believing every thought, obeying every emotional impulse, and wondering why you always feel one step behind your own peace. But you can interrupt that cycle. You can watch a thought come in and not let it build a home. You can feel overwhelmed and still move forward. You can experience fear and still choose action. That's the distinction that changes everything. Action doesn't have to wait for emotion to get in line. Once you learn to sit with feelings without fusing with them, you start building emotional endurance. You stop making everything so personal. Someone criticizes you, and instead of internalizing it, you assess it. You feel anxious, but instead of shutting down, you keep going. You don't wait to feel ready. You don't chase motivation. You lead yourself. You show up in spite of the noise. And slowly, you start trusting yourself. Not because you always feel good, but because you've proven you can act wisely even when you don't. That's how resilience begins. Not with becoming emotionless, but with becoming emotionally sovereign. You feel the same things everyone else does, but you don't let them become the compass. You don't assign meaning too quickly. You let the moment breathe. You give yourself room to ask, is this feeling telling me the truth, or just echoing an old story I haven't let go of? That pause, just that one breath of space, can stop you from becoming something you were never meant to carry. And with that awareness comes freedom. You're no longer at the mercy of your inner states. You can wake up tired and still be focused. You can feel rejected and still know your worth. You can be uncertain and still move with purpose, because you've separated what you feel from what you choose. And that separation is everything. That's what builds identity. Not the emotions you experience, but the values you return to when those emotions show up. The world will try to tell you who you are based on how you act in your worst moments. But you know better. You know that a bad day doesn't erase a strong foundation, that a single failure doesn't erase your progress, that a wave of anger doesn't undo your character. Because you're not here to be perfect. You're here to be consistent, grounded, aware. And that requires owning your role as the one who chooses, not the one who obeys whatever feeling knocks the loudest. Eventually, you realize that emotional maturity isn't about how often you feel good. It's about what you do when you don't. It's about how you carry your values through discomfort, how you speak with honesty even when your pride is bruised, how you stay silent when your ego wants revenge, how you move with grace when your heart wants to break everything in sight. That's the real work. the invisible strength, the kind no one sees, but everyone feels when they're around you. Because when you master this, people notice, not because you seem stoic or cold, but because you seem rooted. You're no longer rattled by every storm. You don't explain your every mood. You don't project your pain onto others. You carry yourself with an inner steadiness that can only come from knowing exactly who you are and who you are not. You are not your emotions. You are the one guiding them, and that difference, practiced daily, is what makes your mind unbreakable. Most people are careful about what they eat, what they breathe, and what they wear. They filter their water, read the labels on food, and cover themselves in cold weather. But when it comes to the mind, when it comes to what they allow into their thoughts, they're reckless. They scroll endlessly through drama, negativity, fear-based headlines, cheap entertainment, and other people's opinions, without stopping to ask what it's doing to them. And it is doing something. Just because it's invisible doesn't mean it's harmless. In fact, the invisible things shape you more than anything else. The quality of your attention, the thoughts you allow to settle, the voices you listen to, the content you consume, these are the building blocks of your inner world. And if you don't guard them carefully, your mind becomes a landfill of noise you never chose, but slowly learned to live with. If your mind were a house, would you let just anyone walk in? Would you let someone come into your living room and shout insults, lies, and fear for hours? Probably not, but people do it all the time through their phones, their TV, their social media, their conversations. They let their focus become contaminated, and then they wonder why they feel drained, anxious, unfocused, or unsure of themselves. It's not always because something is broken. Sometimes it's because too much noise has built up and crowded out the clarity. The mind doesn't function well when it's overstimulated. It doesn't make sharp decisions when it's bloated with gossip and reaction. It can't lead you to peace if all you feed it is noise and distraction. What you consume is not neutral. It either builds you or it breaks you. And it's not just about avoiding obviously toxic content. Sometimes it's the subtle things, the posts that make you compare, the conversations that leave you feeling smaller, the people you follow who make you feel like you're behind. These inputs seem harmless, but they plant seeds. Seeds of doubt, fear, insecurity, and passivity. And the mind, just like soil, doesn't care what you plant. It will grow whatever you water, deliberately or unconsciously. That's why guarding your input is not about restriction. It's about alignment. It's about asking, does this serve the person I'm trying to become? A strong mental attitude doesn't just come from discipline in action, it comes from discipline in attention. If your attention is constantly being hijacked, so is your energy. And when your energy is scattered, your will becomes weak. You become easier to influence, easier to irritate, easier to defeat. That's what happens when you give away your mental space to everything and everyone. You become reactive, not reflective. Loud inside but unclear, busy but not productive, present but not grounded. This is why the Stoics emphasized focus. They knew that if you don't choose what to think about, someone else will. Epictetus once said, "The key is to keep company only with people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best." That principle applies not just to people, but to every form of influence. What you read, watch, hear, and engage with, all of it shapes your mental posture. And if you want to protect your peace, your discipline, your clarity, you need to be ruthless with your attention. Not paranoid, not closed, but intentional. You create a mental environment that reflects the life you want to live, one that promotes depth over distraction, strength over noise, truth over popularity. And this discipline must be daily. You can't clean your thoughts once a week and expect lasting clarity. Just like you don't shower once and stay clean forever. You must filter your mind regularly. Take time to notice what's entering without your permission. Ask yourself whether the voices you're listening to are leading you towards strength or away from it. Whether the content you're consuming is making you wiser or just more reactive. Whether the conversations you're having are lifting you or leaking your focus. Because every day, your mind is being shaped. Not in a moment, but in a million small decisions. And those decisions become your inner environment. When you walk through a polluted city, you wear a mask to protect your lungs. But when your mind walks through polluted ideas, do you have any filter in place? Or do you let it all in, trusting you'll figure it out later? That's the difference between those who cultivate clarity and those who live in confusion. One builds intentional guardrails, the other hopes for the best. But hope is not a strategy when it comes to your mind. If you want power, you need precision. If you want clarity, you need boundaries. This doesn't mean you live in a bubble. It means you build the strength to process your world without becoming poisoned by it. You learn how to stay informed without being consumed, how to listen without absorbing, how to observe without reacting. That skill, mental filtration, is one of the highest forms of discipline. It's what separates those who are easily swayed from those who are grounded. It's what allows you to move through the world without losing yourself in it. Because at the end of the day, an unguarded mind is an unstable one. It might look fine on the surface, but it's constantly shifting under pressure. And that instability shows up in your decisions, your confidence, your energy, your focus. If you're serious about becoming mentally unbreakable, this is where it starts. Not with willpower in big moments, but with quiet decisions about what you let in, what you feed yourself when no one is watching, what kind of mental diet you live on. Just like your body changes based on what you eat, your mind changes based on what you consume. And if you want to be sharp, clear, focused, and strong, then you must treat your input like it matters, because it does. It's not about perfection, it's about awareness, about catching yourself before the mind spirals and gently asking, is this helping? Most people never ask that question. They let the scroll continue, let the drama repeat, let the gossip echo, and then wonder why they feel stuck. But stuck is often not a condition. It's a side effect of polluted input. Clean the input and the path often clears on its own. Remove the distractions and suddenly the next step becomes obvious. The mind is not weak, it's just overwhelmed. Remove the noise and what's left is power. So choose carefully, guard wisely, and remember, your mind is the gateway to everything. What enters your mind eventually enters your life. What you allow in shapes what you believe, and what you believe shapes who you become. Make sure the path you're on is one you chose, not one you drifted into. And that begins with one simple practice. Pay attention to what you give your attention to, because that, more than anything, will determine the strength of your mind. Most people wake up and think about how they look. They wash their face, brush their teeth, change their clothes. They move through physical routines with care and intention because appearance matters, cleanliness matters, presentation matters. But rarely do they stop to ask, what condition is my mind in today? The same person who wouldn't leave the house in stained clothes will walk into the world with stained thoughts, clinging to resentment, replaying conversations that happened years ago, obsessing over imaginary fears or doubts that were never even theirs to begin with. And they call that normal. But the truth is, the mind is no less a vessel than the body. It needs cleansing, structure, and discipline, or it rots under its own weight. Thought discipline isn't about controlling every single thing that enters your mind. That's impossible. Thoughts are constant. They rise, fall, and shift in ways we can't always predict. But what you can control is what you allow to stay. That's the difference. You don't have to believe every thought just because it arrived. You don't have to follow every emotion just because it showed up loudly. The disciplined mind knows how to pause. It knows how to observe a thought without merging with it. To hear it, examine it, and decide, does this serve me? Or is this just noise disguised as truth? The problem is, most people never learn to question their thoughts. They assume that what they think must be real, must be accurate, must be who they are. But the mind isn't a mirror. It's a storyteller, and sometimes it tells you stories based on old pain, old fear, or old conditioning. If you never update the narrative, you'll keep living under scripts that don't reflect who you are now. That's why thought hygiene is essential. Not once a week, not once a month. Daily. You clean your thoughts like you clean your room. Not because you're broken, but because clarity gets buried under clutter. And just like clutter piles up without effort, so do negative thoughts. If you don't challenge them, they multiply. One doubt becomes 5. One harsh opinion becomes a worldview. One disappointment becomes your new identity. That's how thought spirals begin, not with something massive, but with one small idea that went unchallenged for too long. You didn't catch it, so it grew. And by the time you noticed, it had already wrapped itself around your decisions, your confidence, your relationships. That's why awareness isn't optional, it's survival. You need to be able to look at your thinking and say, wait, where did this come from? Is this even mine? Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's what undisciplined thinking does. It runs your life without your permission. It whispers just enough to shift your choices, and then it disappears, leaving you to wonder why you keep ending up in the same place. And it's not that your life is cursed, it's that your thoughts are unchecked. But when you take them seriously, when you treat them like the architects of your reality, you start building something entirely different. You stop letting doubt run your plans. You stop letting fear pick your relationships. You stop letting old wounds edit your present voice. But thought discipline isn't just about cleaning out the bad. It's about actively installing the good. You don't just subtract, you replace. You feed your mind thoughts that build strength, clarity, courage. You give it structure, direction. You don't wait for inspiration. You train mental repetition, because repetition rewires belief. It doesn't matter if you don't fully believe the new thoughts yet. Say them anyway. Feed them anyway. Think them again and again until your brain starts believing them more than the old scripts. This isn't delusion, it's design. You're choosing who you want to be, and you're building that identity thought by thought. It takes work. It takes presence. It takes catching yourself in the middle of a spiral and saying, no, I don't go down that road anymore. It takes noticing that your internal dialogue sounds like your worst critic and deciding to replace it with something wiser, something calmer, something true. And that practice, done every day, is how you become mentally untouchable, not because negativity stops showing up, but because it no longer finds a home. The undisciplined mind is a sponge. It absorbs everything, reacts to everything, and then wonders why it's tired. The disciplined mind is a filter. It decides what stays and what leaves. It doesn't deny reality. It chooses how to engage with it. It doesn't pretend everything is fine. It just doesn't let pain become identity. That's the real distinction. You can feel what you feel without becoming it. You can experience chaos without living in it. And you can sit with uncertainty without drowning in it. Epictetus said, no person is free who is not master of themselves. And that mastery begins with thought, not in trying to force silence or peace, but in creating mental order. You become the curator of your mind. You choose what gets amplified and what gets dismissed, what gets practiced and what gets cut. Over time, this changes how you show up in the world. You stop chasing every reaction. You stop spiraling over what people think. You stop fearing outcomes you can't control, because your internal world becomes more stable than the external one. Eventually, that discipline becomes second nature. You don't wake up and feel overwhelmed by every thought. You don't need hours to recover from every doubt. You move quicker through fear. You return faster to calm. You see a negative thought and say, "That's not me. That's a visitor. It doesn't stay here." And that mindset, that inner command, is what turns ordinary people into extraordinary forces. They're not perfect. They're not emotionless. They've just learned how to separate what's real from what's noise. They've built a kind of mental hygiene that allows them to see clearly, even when life gets messy. So start small. Pay attention. Clean your thoughts. Speak to yourself the way you wish someone had when you were younger. Build the habit of noticing when your mind drifts into old patterns and gently guide it back. Discipline doesn't have to be harsh, it just has to be consistent. That consistency becomes your edge, your foundation, your advantage in a world full of noise. And when your thoughts are clear, your path becomes clear too. Not because life gets easier, but because your mind no longer gets in the way. Most people walk through life feeling heavy, but they don't always know why. There's this quiet restlessness they carry, an anxiety that hums just beneath the surface. They change jobs, cities, relationships, routines, hoping the unease will fade. But it doesn't. Because the real problem isn't what surrounds them, it's what's missing within them. They haven't anchored their mind to anything real, no direction, no meaning, no core purpose to hold on to when life starts pushing back. And when your mind isn't anchored, it drifts, not in some peaceful, poetic way, but in a slow erosion of certainty. You doubt everything. You second-guess yourself. You depend on people, outcomes, circumstances to tell you who you are. And when they fall apart, which they often do, you fall with them. But a person with purpose? They don't float. They move, deliberately. They know that pain might still come, but it won't shake the foundation. Their setbacks don't erase their identity, because their identity wasn't built on what's temporary. It was built on something deeper, something chosen. That's what purpose gives you. Not just motivation, but protection. It protects your energy from being wasted on things that don't matter. It protects your attention from being hijacked by distractions. It protects your heart from being handed to people who don't value it. When you know what you're here for, you stop entertaining everything else. And no, your purpose doesn't have to be some grand vision the world claps for. It doesn't have to be understood by others or validated by society. Sometimes it's quiet, personal, inward, but it's still powerful because it gives your life a shape, a reason to endure, a direction to move toward, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. That's when it matters most. Without it, every small disappointment feels massive. Every delay feels like failure. Every loss feels like the end. But when you're rooted in purpose, even devastation feels like preparation. You start asking, what is this moment building in me? Instead of, why is this happening to me? That shift changes everything, because purpose rewrites how you interpret adversity. Suddenly rejection becomes redirection, failure becomes refinement, pain becomes proof that you're on a path that matters. You stop seeing obstacles as punishments and start seeing them as necessary resistance, the kind that forges strength, the kind that reveals what you truly care about. You begin to understand that the flame inside you doesn't go out because of darkness. It goes out when you forget what it's burning for. Carl Jung said, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." And that's the trap many people fall into. They chase what looks good, status, image, applause, but deep down, it feels hollow. Because no amount of external success can replace the internal need for meaning. That's why some of the most seemingly accomplished people still feel like something's missing. It's not a lack of success, it's a lack of connection. They're climbing ladders that don't lean against anything real, and eventually that collapse catches up with them. But purpose changes that. It turns your efforts into something cohesive, something coherent. You're no longer just doing things to stay busy. You're building something you believe in, even if no one else sees it yet. You become more resilient, not because life gets easier, but because your actions are aligned with something true. You don't need everything to make sense right away. You trust the process because the path itself is meaningful. That's the kind of mindset that can endure seasons of obscurity, loneliness, even suffering, because it knows it's part of something worthwhile. Without that grounding, the mind becomes fragile. It clings to approval. It panics when things don't go as planned. It collapses under pressure because it was never standing on anything solid. But when you find your why, even the worst days don't destroy you. They deepen you. They refine your direction. They burn away what's unimportant and leave you more focused than ever. Purpose becomes your filter. It decides what you say yes to, what you let go of, what you fight for, and what you walk away from without apology. You stop needing to explain yourself to people who don't see your vision. You stop begging for support from people who were never meant to understand your path. You stop shrinking to fit places you've outgrown. Because now you're not just surviving, you're building. You're not just chasing things, you're creating something that matters. Maybe not to everyone, but definitely to you. And that is more than enough. When purpose drives you, your pace changes. You no longer rush into everything. You move with patience, but not passivity. You wait when it makes sense, but you don't stall out in fear. You act when it's time, even if you're uncertain, because the goal is no longer comfort. The goal is alignment, and the more aligned you are, the more peaceful you become. Even in pressure, even in pain, that doesn't mean you won't have moments of doubt. You will. Purpose doesn't eliminate uncertainty. It gives you the strength to face it. It doesn't guarantee clarity at every step. It gives you something to hold on to when clarity is nowhere to be found. It becomes your compass when everything else is fog. And in a world filled with noise, having a personal compass is one of the most powerful things you can own. Eventually, your mind begins to change. It stops asking, "What should I do to feel good right now?" and starts asking, "What should I do that aligns with who I'm becoming?" That shift is everything. It reorders your values. It clarifies your standards. It keeps you from being blown off course by emotions, distractions, or setbacks. You start to feel steady, not because life stops testing you, but because you stop questioning your direction every time it does. So if you're feeling lost, it's not because you're broken. It's probably because you've been drifting too long without anchoring your energy into something deeper. You've let other people's noise drown out your own knowing. You've prioritized comfort over clarity. But you can change that. You can get quiet. You can get honest. You can ask yourself, what actually matters to me? What pain am I willing to endure because it leads somewhere real? What would I keep doing even if no one noticed? The answers to those questions aren't just nice ideas. They're your path. They're the roots that keep you from being blown around by every opinion, every fear, every change in circumstance. Because once your mind is anchored in purpose, it becomes something most people never develop: consistent. And in a world of mental chaos, that kind of consistency becomes your power. Not just to succeed, but to endure, to live fully, to think clearly, and to rise again and again, no matter what life throws your way. There's a moment, barely noticeable, that lives between what happens to you and what you do about it. It's not loud, it doesn't last long, but in that space is your entire power. Most people never see it. Something triggers them, and before they even understand what they're feeling, they're reacting. They say the thing they later regret. They shut down, they lash out, they retreat. Not because they're bad people, but because they've never been taught that they have a choice. They confuse reaction with instinct, as if it's automatic, as if the emotion is in control, but that's not how it works. Reaction is not a command, it's a habit. And like all habits, it can be changed. The truth is, you are not a puppet tied to the strings of your emotions. You are a person with a mind, and that mind, when trained, can separate what you feel from what you choose. But the training doesn't start in the big moments. It starts in the subtle ones. The moment someone cuts you off in traffic, the moment your friend says something careless, the moment life doesn't go according to plan. You feel the rise of heat. The heart races. The impulse speaks. But if you can pause, even for just one breath, you begin to take the wheel. That breath is everything. It breaks the loop. It reminds you that not everything that demands your attention deserves your energy. The discipline of controlled reaction isn't about suppressing your feelings. It's about directing them. Anger can become clarity. Fear can become preparation. Frustration can become insight. But only if you slow down long enough to choose how that energy gets used. Otherwise, it uses you. It becomes an automatic loop. Someone offends you, you explode. Life disappoints you, you collapse. Challenge appears, and you either run or freeze. And over time, this loop becomes your personality. Not because that's who you are, but because that's what you've rehearsed. Controlled reaction is a habit of awareness. It's asking yourself, what am I feeling? Instead of blindly acting from that feeling. And that question alone creates space. That space is your leverage. You don't need hours of meditation. You need one clear second of recognition. This is frustration. This is fear. This is pride. And once it's named, it's tamed. Not silenced, but softened. And from that softness, you can respond with intention instead of reaction. You can speak truth without aggression. You can protect your peace without turning cold. You can stand firm without becoming rigid. But that space isn't given. It's trained. You train it by practicing when it's easy, so you can apply it when it's hard. When you feel disrespected, but choose to respond with calm. When you feel panic, but choose stillness. When someone disappoints you and instead of cutting them off, you communicate clearly. These aren't passive actions, they're powerful ones. Because they aren't controlled by the external world, they're shaped by your inner discipline. And that consistency over time becomes peace. You're no longer afraid of being triggered because you've trained your response. You're no longer anxious about uncertainty because you trust yourself to adapt. You stop feeling guilty for everything you say because your words are chosen, not thrown. And you stop regretting the way you handled things because you didn't hand control over to the emotion of the moment. This doesn't mean you're passive. It doesn't mean you let people walk over you. It means your strength is guided, not scattered. You respond when it matters, not because you've been poked, but because you've been principled. There's a difference. One is reactive, a slave to the moment. The other is intentional, a master of it. That mastery isn't arrogant, it's steady. It knows what deserves a reaction and what deserves silence. It knows when to hold firm and when to walk away, not based on pride, but based on values. Over time, this self-leadership becomes visible. People start to notice. Not because you talk more, but because you react less. You're not the loudest, but you're often the calmest. You're not trying to prove your power, but it's felt in how you carry yourself. And that presence built from thousands of quiet decisions to pause, to breathe, to choose, becomes your edge. In a world where everyone is reacting, you become the one who responds. And that makes you magnetic. It makes you reliable. It makes you strong. But more than how others see you, it's about how you feel inside. You start to trust yourself again. You know you won't betray your values when pressure hits. You know you won't say something you don't mean just because your pride was bruised. You know that even when the emotion is intense, your actions will still be aligned. That kind of trust is rare. It's the kind that creates peace, not just around you, but within you, because you're no longer scared of what you might do in a difficult moment. You've met yourself there before, and you handled it with grace. And it always comes back to that split-second space, the gap between what happens and what you do. In that space lives the difference between chaos and clarity, between regret and growth, between being tossed around by life and walking through it with quiet confidence. Train that space, own that space, and you'll find that the most powerful person in the room isn't the one who speaks the loudest. It's the one who controls their reaction without letting their emotion control them. Pain is part of the contract. If you're alive, you're going to bleed. Physically, emotionally, mentally, there's no life without friction. And yet, pain alone isn't what breaks people. What breaks them is the meaning they give to it, the interpretation, the inner narrative that says, "This shouldn't be happening to me." That one thought turns challenge into suffering, but pain on its own is just information, a signal, a teacher. And when you begin to reframe it, not as punishment but as process, you stop fighting it and start learning from it. There's a massive difference between experiencing pain and becoming a victim to it. The moment you ask, "Why me?" you've already surrendered to powerlessness. You've stepped out of the driver's seat and handed control over to chaos. But the moment you ask, "What is this teaching me?" you step back into agency. You become the student, not the casualty. That's where growth starts. Not when life is easy, but when you decide to turn difficulty into direction. You can't always choose the pain, but you can always choose the posture. That's the core of an unbreakable mind. It doesn't seek a painless path. It builds a mindset strong enough to walk the painful one without falling apart. It doesn't expect life to cooperate. It trains itself to respond with clarity, no matter what life throws. And that begins with reframing. Not denying the pain, not sugarcoating it, but transforming its purpose. Instead of asking for ease, it asks for understanding. Instead of escaping discomfort, it studies it. Because on the other side of pain, there's always information. Pain sharpens awareness. It reveals weaknesses. It exposes illusions. And if you pay attention, it reshapes you. Sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, but always thoroughly. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." He wasn't being dramatic. He was being accurate. Growth is disruptive. It doesn't happen in comfort. It happens when your old ways of thinking no longer work, when the version of you that once survived can't carry you forward anymore. That's why life puts weight on you. It's not to destroy you. It's to reveal whether you've built the inner frame to hold what's coming. And if you haven't, the pain becomes your architect. It forces a redesign. It strips away your illusions, your excuses, your soft spots. That's what hardship does. It breaks what's weak, not to punish, but to rebuild stronger. But rebuilding doesn't happen automatically. It requires attention, intention. You have to sit with your pain long enough to hear what it's trying to tell you, not distract from it, not numb it, not pretend it doesn't matter, but study it like a message, because every painful moment carries a lesson wrapped in discomfort. And if you ignore the discomfort, you miss the lesson. That's how people repeat the same heartbreak, the same mistakes, the same cycles, because they ran from pain instead of listening to it. But when you listen, really listen, pain becomes a map. It shows you where your boundaries need to be stronger, where your mindset needs to evolve, where your expectations need to mature. And that shift from avoidance to awareness is everything. Suddenly, you stop dreading hardship. You start preparing for it. You start welcoming it as the exact material needed to strengthen the foundation. You realize your peace doesn't come from the absence of pain. It comes from the presence of purpose within the pain. You don't get tougher by wishing for soft days. You get tougher by reframing hard days. That doesn't mean you celebrate every hardship. It means you extract meaning from it so that it doesn't go to waste. You use it. You recycle it into wisdom, discipline, perspective. That's why emotional resilience isn't a trait you're born with. It's a skill you practice. You practice it by facing what hurts and saying, "This will not be meaningless," even if you didn't deserve it, even if it wasn't your fault, even if it came suddenly. You can still choose to build something from it. That's not delusion. That's sovereignty. It's what separates those who get stuck in their pain from those who transform through it. The ones who get stuck believe that pain is something done to them. The ones who grow know that pain is something given to them, to shape, to mold, to convert. And it's not about toxic positivity. It's not about pretending everything is okay when it's not. It's about being grounded in the truth that you are not what happened to you. You are what you do with what happened to you. That distinction is the line between a fragile mind and a powerful one. A fragile mind asks for comfort at all costs. A powerful mind asks for clarity, even if it comes with discomfort, because clarity builds character, comfort builds dependency, and in the long run, dependency is what truly breaks a person, not the pain itself. Every moment of pain holds two doors, one to bitterness, the other to wisdom, and you walk through one based not on the intensity of the pain, but on how you interpret it. So take the pain and ask better questions. Not, "How do I get rid of this?" but, "What is this here to build in me?" That question alone changes your emotional posture. It replaces victimhood with curiosity. And from curiosity, you regain control, not over the pain itself, but over the story you tell around it. You begin to see setbacks as chapters, not conclusions. You stop defining your identity by what went wrong. You start seeing failure not as proof that you're broken, but as proof that you're evolving. Because no one evolves in still water. The mind is like a muscle. It's forged in friction, in tension, in resistance, and pain, when understood, is simply life adding weight to the bar. It doesn't care if you're ready. It cares if you'll rise. So don't waste your pain. Use it to illuminate the path. Use it to reinforce your foundation. Use it to remind yourself that peace is not the absence of difficulty. It's the presence of direction inside it. When you train yourself to think this way, pain doesn't control you. It educates you. It no longer derails your momentum. It deepens your mission. And little by little, you become the kind of person who doesn't crumble at the first sign of discomfort. You become the one who turns every storm into a study and every scar into a story of strength. You can talk about who you want to be. You can write it in a journal. You can even post about it. But none of it matters unless your actions align with your words. Identity isn't built in thought alone. It's built in behavior. Small, consistent behaviors repeated when things are hard, not when they're easy. The truth is, you don't become resilient by thinking resilient thoughts. You become resilient by doing resilient things, especially when you don't feel like it. That's the part most people miss. They wait to feel motivated before they act. They wait to feel confident before they speak. But if you only act when it feels good, you're not building identity, you're building dependence. That's why pressure matters. That's where the real version of you is revealed. Not when things are calm, not when everything's lined up, but when you're tired, distracted, hurt, and you still show up, you still focus, you still follow through, you still stand tall. That is how identity forms. It doesn't come from a single defining moment. It comes from 1,000 unseen choices, repeated in silence when no one's watching. That's why repetition under pressure is the real sculptor of self, because it takes what you say and tests whether it holds when the storm hits. It's easy to say, "I'm disciplined." But are you still disciplined when it's raining outside and your alarm goes off at 5 a.m.? It's easy to say, "I'm focused." But what do you do when your phone buzzes, your mind wanders, and there's no one there to keep you on track but you? Most people believe identity is discovered, like it's hidden somewhere deep inside waiting to be unlocked. But it's not. Identity is constructed. It's forged moment by moment, shaped by what you choose to repeat, not once, but again and again, especially when it's inconvenient. That's why the little things matter so much. It's not just about grand gestures or major life changes. It's about micro decisions. Do you finish what you start? Do you stick to your word? Do you do what you said you would, even when no one would notice if you didn't? That's where integrity lives. That's where character is shaped. And over time, those small acts of follow-through become the foundation of who you are, not just in your own mind, but in the eyes of others. Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." That distinction is sharp but essential because your actions don't lie. They reflect your priorities, your discipline, your inner architecture. If you say you value growth but avoid anything uncomfortable, your actions will eventually expose the truth. If you say you want peace but you constantly chase chaos, your behavior will always tell the real story. That's why you have to align your actions with your intentions, and not just when it's easy. And here's the beautiful part. The more you act in alignment, the more stable your identity becomes. Doubt fades, confusion clears. You no longer need to convince yourself who you are. You just know, because you've lived it, you've proven it, you've walked through fire and stayed the course. That kind of certainty can't be bought, borrowed, or faked. It's earned, one difficult choice at a time, and it makes you unshakable, not because life stops testing you, but because you've trained yourself to pass the test every single day. It's important to understand that resilience isn't a fixed trait. It's not something you either have or don't. It's a skill, and like any skill, it's built through repetition. That's why you don't need to be born tough. You become tough by doing the hard thing again and again until it becomes part of you. Not something you reach for in emergencies, but something you carry quietly in everything you do. You walk differently when you know you've earned your strength. But that strength has to be maintained. It's not a one-time effort. Just like physical strength fades without training, mental strength fades without discipline. You have to keep showing up, keep pushing, keep choosing the harder path, not because you enjoy the struggle, but because you know what it's shaping in you. It's easy to let things slide once you've made some progress, to tell yourself, "I've done enough." But identity isn't about what you did. It's about what you do, consistently, relentlessly. This is why comfort is so dangerous. It convinces you that you can pause your discipline and still keep your edge. But the truth is, every skipped rep, every broken promise, every compromise, it chips away at the foundation you've built. That's why you need to be ruthless with yourself in the smallest decisions. Not harsh, just honest. Hold the line, even when no one else would blame you for letting go. Because that's how self-respect grows, not from ease, but from self-enforced standards. At some point, people will try to label you. They'll say, "You've changed," or "This isn't who you used to be," and they'll be right, because the person you used to be was built on convenience. The person you've become was built on consistency. You didn't become someone else. You built the person you were always capable of being. That's the real transformation. Not in how loud you get, not in how impressive your words sound, but in how quietly your actions confirm your values. And when people ask how you got there, the answer will sound simple, but it won't be easy, because the truth is, you just refused to quit. You woke up when it was hard. You focused when it was boring. You pushed when it would have been easier to coast. You became your habits. You became your rituals. And those rituals made you resilient, not in theory, but in reality. So, when the world gets noisy, when pressure mounts, and you feel pulled in every direction, remember this: you don't rise to your goals. You fall to your standards. And your standards are shaped by what you repeat, not what you hope for, but what you practice. So practice strength, practice clarity, practice silence in chaos. Let your actions be louder than your intentions. And over time, you won't need to chase identity, because everything you do will already speak it. Life has a way of stripping things away from us. The job we thought was secure, the relationship we believed would last, the routines that gave us comfort and predictability. Sometimes everything external begins to fall apart at once, but the person who endures isn't the one with the most resources. It's the one who refuses to let their attitude collapse with their circumstances. Because attitude, more than any possession, more than any plan, is the real armor. It doesn't protect you from pain, but it shields your inner world from becoming corrupted by it. When you lose something that mattered deeply, the temptation is to spiral inward, to let bitterness take root, to let resentment grow wild. But that's where attitude becomes critical. It's not about pretending everything is okay. It's about standing tall in the storm and saying, "This may have shaken me, but it won't shape me." It's choosing your posture when everything else is uncertain. And that choice is everything. Because while we may not control what happens around us, we always have a say in how we meet it. An attitude rooted in purpose doesn't just help you recover, it helps you rebuild stronger. It becomes a compass when you're lost and a shield when you're exposed. The right attitude won't stop heartbreak or failure, but it ensures those experiences don't redefine you. They refine you. And this is where the true transformation happens. Not when life hands you a smooth path, but when you keep your mind upright while walking through chaos. The person who holds their attitude while everything else is shaking becomes impossible to defeat. It's important to understand that attitude isn't just a reaction. It's a trained response. It's cultivated through repeated inner choices. Every time you hold your integrity when shortcuts tempt you, every time you speak the truth when it would have been easier to lie, every time you stay calm while others rage, these moments are not small. They are the slow forging of your inner sword. You may not see it right away, but it's there, growing sharper, stronger, more resilient with each test. Seneca once wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." That friction you feel, the pressure, the discomfort, the unexpected loss, it isn't meaningless. It's shaping you. The way you carry yourself through it matters more than what's lost, because it's your attitude that tells the world what you're made of, and more importantly, it tells you who you are, not just in theory, but in practice. People often confuse optimism with attitude, but optimism is fragile. It relies on conditions. It's easy to be hopeful when things are going well. True attitude, on the other hand, is forged in adversity. It's not based on expectation. It's rooted in principle. And principle doesn't waver when the environment changes. That's why your attitude becomes your armor. It's not flashy. It doesn't need applause. It just is. Consistent, quiet, powerful. You'll notice the most grounded people don't panic when things go wrong. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because they've built something inside that the world can't touch. That's the strength you develop when your attitude becomes your core. It's not surface-level motivation, it's deep internal anchoring. So even if your plans fall apart, your principles remain. Even if people leave, your dignity stays. Even if the outcome is uncertain, your direction is unwavering. And the truth is, people will try to challenge it. Some will misunderstand your silence as weakness. Others will mistake your composure for coldness. But attitude doesn't seek validation. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It simply persists. When you lead with it, you begin to attract experiences and people that reflect that same strength. And you also begin to lose the things that were never meant to stay. The distractions, the noise, the shallow attachments that collapse under pressure. Your attitude becomes the invisible line you draw. It tells life, you can take things from me, but you can't take me from me. That's the core of self-respect. It's not about being untouchable, it's about being unshakable, and that's not something you're born with. It's something you build through choice, through repetition, through showing up on hard days and refusing to let pain redefine your purpose. Over time, you'll notice something interesting. The external storms won't feel so threatening, not because life gets easier, but because you get sturdier. You stop bracing for impact and instead start walking with intention. You stop flinching at setbacks and instead start learning from them. You stop fighting for control and instead take control of the one thing that truly matters, your own mind. There's a quiet kind of power in someone who keeps their head when others lose theirs. A calmness that feels like command. That's what attitude does. It gives you presence. Not the kind you force, but the kind you carry. You don't have to speak loudly. You don't have to convince anyone. Your energy does the speaking. Your silence becomes a language. And that language says, I've been through the fire, and I didn't come out burned, I came out sharpened. So if you've lost something lately, a relationship, a job, a plan, don't obsess over the loss. Ask instead, did I keep my attitude? Because if you did, you've lost nothing permanent. You've lost an external form, but you've kept your internal structure, and that structure is what will rebuild everything you need better than before. You are not the chaos around you. You are the composure you choose within it, and that choice is always yours, no matter how loud the world gets. Every single day, without even realizing it, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you are becoming. Not with your words, but with your actions. Every moment you get up when it would be easier to quit. Every time you hold your ground instead of seeking comfort. These moments might seem small, insignificant even, but they're not. They're building something. You are living proof, not of what life has handed you, but of how you've chosen to meet it. You can't fake this. The world eventually sees what you're made of. And more importantly, so do you. There's a difference between enduring and proving. Enduring is passive. It's what we do when we're just trying to survive the day. But proving is intentional. It's what we do when we decide, even in the face of exhaustion or doubt, that we will not settle for anything less than growth. There are two paths inside you, the part that wants to retreat and the part that wants to rise, and every decision you make feeds one or the other. The proof of who you are becoming is not found in your imagination, it's found in the repetition of your response to resistance. Most people think they're fragile, because they've never trained their mind to be anything else. They avoid pressure, not realizing that pressure is exactly where power is forged. You don't become unbreakable by avoiding what scares you. You become unbreakable by walking toward it, by learning, adjusting, falling forward, and rising sharper. When you choose challenge over comfort, you're not proving your toughness, you're proving your potential. And the more you do it, the more you begin to realize you were never fragile. You were just unfamiliar with your own depth. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." That choice is the great equalizer. Not everyone starts with the same resources or background or support, but everyone, every single person, has the power to choose how they respond. And that choice becomes your legacy, not the one you write at the end of your life, but the one you build day by day in silence, in moments no one sees, in efforts that are often thankless but never meaningless. You're not here just to cope. You're here to conquer. That doesn't mean winning every battle. It doesn't mean never falling. It means refusing to let your mind become the enemy. It means not giving your energy to excuses, even when they sound reasonable. It means deciding that your identity will not be shaped by fear, by comparison, or by past failures. Coping gets you through the moment. Conquering changes who you are. And sometimes the most powerful conquest is over your own lower impulses, the need for validation, the desire to be liked, the fear of being alone. When your mind belongs to you, nothing outside of you has leverage. That's the real shift. It's not about becoming cold or emotionless. It's about becoming disciplined in what you allow to influence you. The person who owns their thoughts owns their power. No one can manipulate them with guilt. No one can distract them with noise. No one can disturb their peace without permission. That kind of clarity doesn't come from theory. It comes from choosing, over and over again, to live in alignment with what strengthens you. And here's something most people overlook. The proof you leave behind isn't always dramatic. It's in the silence you keep instead of arguing. It's in the focus you maintain while others are scattered. It's in the consistency you bring when motivation runs out. Quiet discipline, steady presence, the ability to act without applause. These are the traits of someone who has stopped needing to be seen and started needing to be solid. And when you live that way, you become a lighthouse, not swayed by the waves, but guiding others through the storm by example. Your potential isn't some abstract idea waiting in the future. It's being revealed now, in how you manage your mornings, how you speak to yourself when no one is listening, how you respond to disappointment. That's where the truth is. And that truth is always a reflection of what you're training. If you train your mind to collapse in difficulty, you'll keep repeating the cycle. But if you train your mind to seek the lesson, to rise with clarity, to hold the line, you become something different. You become someone unshakable. This world doesn't reward the loudest voice. It rewards the most aligned, the one who knows who they are and doesn't need a reaction to validate it. You don't have to declare your strength. Live it. Let your consistency do the talking. Let your presence speak volumes. There's something magnetic about a person who doesn't flinch when plans break, who doesn't beg for attention, who simply walks their path, clean, focused, intentional. That is what makes you unforgettable. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're not trying to prove your worth to people who don't understand your mission. You're trying to prove to yourself that you are exactly who you said you would be, that when pressure came, you didn't fold, that when comfort called, you didn't pick up, that when the path narrowed, you didn't turn around. That's the kind of self-respect no one can give you, and no one can take away. So ask yourself this: what are you proving today? With your actions, with your thoughts, with your presence. Are you proving hesitation, or are you proving hunger? Are you proving a story of limitation or a story of growth? That answer doesn't come from what you hope for. It comes from what you do, again and again, until the proof becomes impossible to ignore, until the mirror doesn't show you who you used to be, but who you chose to become. You are not waiting for permission. You are not waiting to be saved. You are not here to be shaped by the noise of the world. You are here to shape it, through discipline, through integrity, through power carried quietly. Because at the end of the day, it's not the titles or the applause that define you. It's the invisible work, the part of you that shows up when it's hard and keeps showing up long after others have stopped. That is who you are. Not fragile, just untrained. But now, you're training. Now, you're rising. Now, you're becoming the living proof that nothing and no one can touch a mind that finally belongs to itself. No one can take what you've earned in silence. No one can break what you've built through discipline. And the moment you decide to own your mind, fully, fearlessly, the world shifts. Thank you for walking this path with us. If this message spoke to you, watch the next video on the screen. Your journey is far from over. And as always, thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal.